Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast fourth season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. This is an amazing episode because Susan Rattan boards the mothership. She plays Gladys on A Man on the Inside on Netflix. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. It's an amazing episode because Jay Gruska boards the mothership to discuss the score to Supernatural. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Gruska. Thank you for coming to Traverse the Stars podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, Jeff.
It's an absolute honor to have you, sir. Like I said, a big fan of Supernatural, so I've been a fan of yours and for years. Me and my father would watch your show, Supernatural, every week, so we would hear your music. And I think it's absolutely terrific that you're on my show. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So I will start off with a question of inspiration. Who inspired your love for music and who are your earliest influences?
Well, I started as a songwriter when I was, in my teens, and really was that's mainly what I wanted to be. I was a singer too, and I had a couple of solo albums that I did, one for ABC Dunhill, and then a couple of albums, one with a band and one a solo album for Warner Brothers back in the 80s, or as I like to refer to it, back in the 1900s. I sort of started that way. I grew up in a household that always had music playing. Neither of my parents were musicians or certainly not professional musicians, but there was always a huge assortment from sort of, my mom loved sort of salsa, Latin salsa music. She loved the whole American songbook. Every standard ever was played in the house. Broadway musicals. And then for me, and so I grew up, Sinatra, all sort of classic stuff of let's say the 40s and 50s that we were constantly being played. And then the Beatles, like a story that has probably been repeated millions of times, changed everything for me. It's what I wanted to do. And so I would say from a pop songwriting standpoint, if I pick the top 3 or 4 or 5, it would be, as influence as a songwriter and as a pop music mindset, let's say, or standard bearers, I would say the Beatles, Paul Simon, Stevie Wonder. It's such a long list. Elton John of the 70s. It's a pretty big list, but I would say those are the top ones certainly for songwriting. And then when it came to sort of, my parents listened to classical as well, but probably more of the popular classical rather than things that I discovered later in life. They didn't listen to Ravel, but those are things that I discovered later. And I would say in film scoring, it's just the icon of John Williams that turned my head around on Jaws and Close Encounters and the first Superman. And I just went, that is a whole other level. And so hopefully that somewhat answers your question.
Oh, it totally does. No, and you also mentioned many of the classic writers and bands and musicians that I've loved as well. So great choices. Now, an interesting thing about obviously composing for film, and as you said, you started off as a lyricist. You're trying to.
I didn't start off as a lyricist.
Okay.
I was always mainly music.
Oh, I thought a songwriter. You said.
Yes, but a songwriter. Okay, let's define that.
Okay.
A songwriter can either be someone who writes music and lyrics to a song.
Yeah.
Or just the music with a lyricist, or just the lyrics with a music writer.
Okay.
Either combination or component of that is considered to be a songwriter.
Okay.
Yes, just for semantic reasons and for the purpose of being on the same page about it. Marilyn and Alan Bergman were songwriters, but they pretty much, well, I think Alan wrote some music, but they were known as lyricists.
Okay.
You follow me? Leonard Bernstein wrote the score to West Side Story, but he wrote the music only.
Okay.
Stephen Sondheim wrote the lyric. So they were both songwriters.
Okay.
Make
Gotcha.
sense?
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Even though I write lyrics and have written lyrics on a few, a couple of hit songs, I focused mainly music. The music was sort of was my easier language.
Mm. So when you're thinking about creating the music, the instrumental, how are you viewing it? Because with instrumental, you're talking about creating basically language within just a sound, within the feeling of sound. How do you approach writing a particular piece of music? Are you focusing on an overall theme, a character? Is it just a melody that's in your head and you start working it out? How do you approach that?
Jeff, are we talking now about film scoring or songwriting?
Yeah, I was okay. I think
Because
we should be specific.
it's well, I'd like to be specific because I've been lucky enough to have a good ride in both of those worlds.
Right, right, right.
And so, even though ultimately the experience of creating a piece of music is very similar, you're at the service of two different things from one to the
Okay.
other. In songwriting, let's say, if I'm not writing for a particular artist,
Okay.
um, what shows up, and you try to mold and develop that, as opposed to being of service to the story and the film and the images and the filmmaker's desires. So it's two kind of different mindsets. I'd say
Okay.
once you get past the point of the kernel of the idea, I think the process is very similar in terms of development and finding the right melody and finding the right harmonic support and all the little, everything, the devil in the details, as it were. So, but I would say that if we're talking about film scoring, to answer your question, it really comes from the images I see, the conversations with the filmmakers. In television, it tends to be more the producers, and in feature films, it tends to be more the director in terms of who's communicating their desires or their vision of what it should be to the composer. And so, aside from my own knee jerk reaction to images and my own emotional reaction and how that would translate to music, those other inputs are super important. What I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what's the geographic location? What's the what's the how's it what's the how does it look? What's the cinematography like? What's the tone of the actors, the tone of the scene, the tempo of the scene? That's a little bit, maybe not that esoteric, but as a composer, every scene has its own built-in musical tempo potentially. And maybe, if you give me, three composers in a room, it's going to be three different visions of what it could be. And maybe the same with 10 composers and 100 composers. But that is a process. And all those things happen sometimes subliminally, but sometimes sort of right in the foreground, or even hunting and pecking, playing, noodling to a scene and seeing immediately, oh, there's something that feels right about this thematically or texturally or tempo wise. So might have been a bit of a long-winded way to
Oh,
answer your question.
no, you know what? The thing is, though, I like being specific about that because as someone who is not a composer or a lyricist or in any area in the world of music myself, it helps me understand the language we're going to be using in our conversation. And I like the education. And when you're thinking about, so we're going to be talking mostly supernatural, so we're talking mostly film, television scoring going forward. So you are
Gotcha.
the composer for Supernatural, and you did um, well, with Christopher Leonard, you did a large number of the episodes.
Well, we alternated.
Right.
We alternated for all 15 seasons. I think there were a couple seasons where I might have done one extra episode because sometimes we did odd numbers of episodes. So, if it fell on me in the rotation. But yeah, I think we each did in the neighborhood of 165-ish, 166, 67, something like that episodes. But we, as a general rule, for all 15 seasons, if I scored the first episode of that season, he did the second, and onward and onward and onward like that.
And I think it was also, like I said, as I mentioned earlier, me and my fellow would watch the show every week. It's one of our favorite shows ever.
Hmm.
Which one of the reasons I love talking because I also love the music. So, how did you get involved with Supernatural? And when it was first pitched to you, how was it pitched?
Well, it's fairly simple, and I'll give you the brief history, which is that Eric Kripke, the very brilliant creator of the show and the concept, went to college with Chris Leonard's, and so they had a relationship already going, and they probably did. I think they did a project or two before Supernatural together. So that was Eric's choice to score the show. And I believe because of Eric was relatively young, both in years and in show running experiential level, he was kind of paired up with Robert Singer, who was a seasoned showrunner, writer, producer. I guess Warner Brothers paired them together. Luckily, they hit it off great. And then, luckily for me, when Eric said, "Well, here's the composer I want," Bob said, "Well, here's the composer I want." But instead of it being, a wrestling event, I think that yeah, obviously the decision was, well, let's have Chris do the first one, the pilot, because he was the original hired person to do it, and Jay will do the second one, and we'll see what how it all feels, and lucky for me, it was kind of a love fest right out of the box, really, with everybody, including Chris and I. A lot of mutual admiration society stuff, and we're each different. We're different sort of style of writers, I think, and we have our own personal take on things, but somehow we understood the language of the show, and I think that in some ways it served not only the audience, but it served to keep us interested in reinventing the wheel. 15 seasons is a really long run. That's a lot of episodes. It's whatever that is, 320, 325 episodes. It's a lot of episodes to stay connected and interested and care. And I think one of the things about Supernatural, and I think I'm sort of answering your question, one of the things about Supernatural that was always great fun as a composer was that the landscape musically always had the potential to change. It could be a rock and roll oriented score one week, and the next week it was pure boogeyman, scary atonal music, and the week after that it maybe had sort of a country slide guitar Ry Cooder kind of feeling, and that made it really wonderful. And I think they both appreciated, both the bosses, Eric and Bob, they appreciated, they didn't reject melody when something needed to be melodic. Had a couple of themes on the show that were written fairly early on that I sort of reused over the whole run of the show, and that was wonderful. So, did I answer?
I think one of the things that must have been complicated over the 15-year run of Supernatural I can't help but think for you as composing the music is that over 15 years you had any number of genres because Supernatural skips genres all the time from comedy, as you said, to horror to the Old West and everything between. You had
Exactly.
multiple showrunners over 15 years from Kripke to Singer, and I can't remember the name of one of the other showrunners. You had different directors over the course of 15 years. How do you compose and keep everyone happy, make sure you're keeping, like, what was your North Star to writing these lyrics across 15 years, genres, directors, writers, showrunners? That's got to be complicated.
The real truth is that the North Star was always either Eric or Bob or both of them. And when Eric left the show, which I think was after season 5,
Yep.
then Phil Segrisha and Bob became sort of North Stars as direction. And a handful of times in that whole run did directors come in and come to a spotting session and give their thoughts about it. And that was always welcomed, but more often than not. And you know what I mean by spotting session?
I would love some more detail on that.
I can tell you and your listeners. So the basic process for scoring film or TV, and there's little variations for this, but the composer might be given a script. I prefer to see images than see a script. The only time a script makes sense is if I have to write something before shooting, or in the case of that, I forget what I think the 200th episode, the musical episode, fan fiction. In the case of that, writing songs beforehand and getting a little production going beforehand because people have to sing on screen to it. But short of that, we might get a rough cut, which means there's no visual effects, there's no sound effects. It's the basic story and plot line of the show, usually with a temp score, meaning a temporary score, either our own music. They more often than not used a lot of our music. Obviously, in the first few seasons, they didn't because there wasn't enough sort of library built up to do that. Or they'll use anything from outside as a template of saying, we think this kind of works. So we would watch that. A composer watches that, and then there's a spotting session where you go and sit with like I said, in TV, the producers, occasionally the director, sound effects people, visual. Color code people. That's generally it. And music supervisor. Music supervisor is there to, either help suggest songs that will be used in the episode, or when the producers want a certain song, the music supervisor will help to clear the song, help make the deal to buy the rights, etc. So that spotting session is where everything is decided for the most part. Let's start the music here. Let's end the music here. And more often than not, a little conversation about tone of the music. And sometimes a conversation about whether the temp music that's there is in the right vein or not. And as often as I thought the temp music really worked, I also thought, well, I can do better than that. Or what do you guys think if we try this approach? And, trying to describe what you're going to do musically is like trying to tell someone what chocolate tastes like. It's a task, but it's part of our job to try to impart that. And the other part of our job that's really important, because not all directors and producers have musical language. They just know what they want and what they feel. And more often than not, it's specific and it's real and it's exacting, but the communication about it can be, it's an interpretive thing. I think when he said he doesn't like when it goes faster there, I think he means that it's modulating. it's going up a minor third, or it's going, it's so that's, part of our job, but that's part of the process. Um,
No worries.
well, because there was always a constant. I would say the biggest constant was Bob Singer.
Okay.
And the first few years, Bob Singer and Eric, but the biggest, and then it became Bob and Phil Segrisha. And yes, there were other showrunners, several of them, and they would be there too. But more often than not, unless they were also, let's say, sometimes they would direct one. Then if Phil Segrisha and Bob, who both directed a lot of episodes, if they had a strong feeling about it, my ears perked up because they're not only the producer, but they directed it, and they have a strong feeling about what they want it to be. And then, then we're sort of, there's not a lot of time in episodic television. So everybody's muscle has to be pretty good because you can't sit and reflect for a long time. You have to jump right in. And yeah, there's, if you're going to be rewriting and rethinking, you're just going to have long days. You're just going to sleep a couple hours a night. And that's just, in the first few seasons, that really was the case. There were long days just trying to figure out the language and what sonics would work and what sonics wouldn't work. And then once we sort of got our feet under us, then, you can make a little more of a plan. But, that X factor is what makes it thrilling, honestly.
Now, one interesting thing about Supernatural, especially for the first 5 seasons, I think it became less impactful, I think, later on. But for the first 5 seasons, Supernatural was very specific about having a classic rock music within the shows as well. So when you're
Exactly.
composing your music, are you keeping in mind the classic rock songs that are being included into the episodes as well?
Almost always no,
Okay.
because a mandate-ish from Eric was these are two separate universes. The underscore is whatever the underscore needs. Monster of the week, love story, brotherly love story, et cetera, as opposed to the music that the boys like, right? And so it's really two universes. And, occasionally we would, there's a lot of guitars in the score. It would be, we would tip our hat to it, but it was really its own separate thing.
So, I mean, obviously, the two main characters in Supernatural, Sam and Dean, when you're composing the pieces for the episodes, are you determining what their themes are like, and how were you determining what sounds belong to the two boys? And were they similar, or did you view them as being opposites of one another, and how you approached what their themes were going to be musically?
So there were never themes for them individually that I recall, unless it was episode specific. But there was, for me, a brothers theme of, let's call it a family theme, whether it was them reflecting on their parents or their relationship to each other or their bond and all that. That I used that a lot. I used it a lot. But the fun part about that was just re-orchestrating it. So sometimes it was solo piano, sometimes it was an orchestral feeling, sometimes it was cello or oboe or other woodwinds playing the lead melody with other kinds of support. So there wasn't, that I recall, an individual theme for the guys, unless it was episode specific. If it was a show that mainly featured a journey that Dean was on, some themes showed up. But in terms of what got used over the years, it was usually had to do with both of them and the overarching familial theme.
Now, another thing interesting about Supernatural, and this may be a bias on my part or not, I'm not sure. It feels when you watch Supernatural, like I said, I watched all 15 years. The first 5 years were more horror related, usually darker in tone. And as the show went on, it felt like it was getting a little lighter in tone as it went on in later years. Musically, did that have an impact on how you thought about the show from the first 5 years to the last, to say, almost 10 years?
Yeah, no, that's you're spot on. I mean, my personal preference was that Monster of the Week because that turned the that turned the work into little movies
Hmm.
every week. Not to say that it wasn't also fun to develop those long arcs of angels and all that stuff, which would go over the course of a few seasons. That had its own interest and appeal. But my favorite was having a little movie with this particular demon of the week. But like it went on for 10 years after those first five, incredibly. So you just adjust. Like I said at the beginning, you let the story and the acting and the tone of each. I never stopped looking at it as its own little movie. It got a little gluier when it went into these long arcs of these characters that reappeared and reappeared and reappeared. But yeah, it was sort of a slow metamorphosis. So I mean, it sort of happened after season five that
Yeah.
that direction change happened, but it didn't feel like a horrible shock. Although I think there were some fans that grumbled about it.
Well, I will say, my first 5 years are my absolute favorites. 'Cause
Yeah.
I did like the darker horror tones of the first 5 years, and the more concentration on it being like a road show, like a road map of America, and later it
Yes.
kind of became more stationary. Um,
Yes.
One thing that I felt was kind of interesting is that, as I mentioned about it being a show of America, like a road map of America, they went to every episode was a different place where a different monster was in a different location in the country. Eventually, they had like the Man of Letters, and they kind of stayed more stationary. And the
Correct.
home of the show became stationary in this one building instead of the car being the home. Did that change how you thought about the show, where it became more? I don't know if necessarily stationary, but it definitely became more
It's
base
a
oriented.
It's a good description of it, Jeff. I mean, and it became more stationary, even though the boys still had to go out to
Yeah.
other places. But you're absolutely right. As opposed to all those different it was a different location every week. Those first 5 years. Um, I don't think it affected it that much because there was still a newness to the storyline each week, and so. In terms of just my thinking, or from a composer's point of view, I'm just still reacting to what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing and what the story is, and I'm still in service of that, no matter what the bird's eye view is. Everything you've eloquently described just now, from being sort of stationary versus the first 5 years where we were always on the move. And I really loved that Americana
Yeah.
aspect of it, because that's what started off this idea that you could be so different musically, or have little musical moments that reflected a geographic location. So that made it super interesting. But you just you just grow with it. You evolve with it. You have to. You have to. A lot of the scoring that we did, or concepts that we did in the first 2 or 3 years, other than a couple of the themes, I think I wrote that family theme in season five.
Oh, America. We're gonna get to Americana shortly. I love
Yes.
that piece.
Yeah. So I wrote, thank you. Appreciate that. And that's the one I'm referring to
Yeah.
as and so, other than that, there wasn't a whole lot that could have worked later on in season 9 or 10 that we did early on to sort of bring back, because, the tone of the show had changed. Personally, I really did like when they exploited humor more.
Mm.
I didn't do the episode. Chris did it, but for me, it was one of the funniest. I mean, I fell off my chair laughing. The French, whatever it's called, the
Oh, I
French
think that's the French. What is it?
mistake. The
Yes,
French mistake, was it?
I
Yeah,
think so. It sounds right.
yeah. I mean, just a riot. Breaking the fourth wall, and the meta on steroids, and it's just hysterical.
I mean, I will say, I mean, one of my favorite episodes, especially for the humor one, can't remember the name of it, but was the wormhole episode where they get stuck in that loop, like the Groundhog Day loop. I mean,
Oh,
that one was absolutely brilliant.
do you mean where Dean dies
Yes,
every
over and over
evening?
again. I love that episode. It's one of the funniest things I've ever.
I did that one. I did that one, and that was funny. That was definitely funny. So there's some real standouts like that for me, humor wise, and I love personally that the show was able to, not take itself too seriously
Hmm.
in some of those contexts. Had a good laugh at
Well,
our own.
then, like I said, you definitely compose. If the Groundhog Day episode isn't my favorite episode, it's definitely in the top 3 or 4 episodes. It was so absolutely genius. The timing is brilliant on that show. The actors, Jensen does a great comedic timing. You don't think
Jensen,
he's a great comedy actor, but he is.
you wouldn't think it because he's so handsome and he's such a solid actor, but my God, is he funny?
Yeah,
He's just naturally funny. All those goofball eating mouthful
yeah.
things over the years. But he's just, funny. They were both excellent casts for the show. But I was always really impressed with how Jensen could go from being completely dramatic and tough and macho, and then just be silly and goofy. And I mean, he was great. He was great.
Another character that I think after Sam and Dean, the next most popular character to come out of the show is Castiel with Misha Collins Castiel.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding of Castiel from when he first appeared was that he was supposed to be a one-off character. He shows up for an episode and he was going to be, maybe one to a different angel. But he becomes increasingly important as the series goes on, and becomes basically as much of a regular almost as Sam and Dean. So when you're thinking about Castiel musically, how did you grow your music for the character as he becomes more developed and becomes more impactful to the show as the series went on?
Yeah, good. Well, I think I did the first time he ever appeared. I don't remember the name of the episode. I
Mm,
just remember one scene where his wings,
yeah.
sped, and it sort of you see the shape of it on the, lights up the room and all that. And I just remember I didn't know at that point, none of us did, that he was going to be, really the third main character. Um, I think it's the same answer, Jeff. Episode by episode, if he required a little extra handling, I don't think I had a theme per se for him. Let me think if I did. I, I can't recall if I had a specific theme, but there might have been, tonally things to just enhance his otherworldliness. So there might have been some colors, musical colors that were used to distinguish him from a mortal soul. But I don't remember writing a theme per se. But the more involved and more important he got, the more he was treated musically, but not with a theme per se.
Now, I'm pretty sure I'm getting the title right, but Swan Song, which is like the final episode of season 5. Now,
That's the first use of Americana.
yeah. So when that episode Swan Song came out, was it the perception or the thought that that was going to be the last episode of the show? To me, was it that kind of like the general belief?
No,
Okay.
we we sure all hoped not. But I think in Eric's mind, always he imagined around a 5-year arc, and I think frankly that's why he. I don't know the exact reason that he left. other than to go on to other creative ventures, which he's obviously done multiple times. But his presence and his vibe, and I would check in with him, whether by email or we'd speak now and then. And he complimented me either by email or a couple times on after he'd see something. His presence and hand was always felt, even though he physically wasn't there. But I remember, I don't think it was until season 14 or 13 where I went, how much longer could we go? You know what I mean? Until that, every year, and this is, I think, everybody, cast, crew, everybody was like, it's a good quality of life. I like all the people, and that's a rare thing where you consistently like all the people. We just wanted to keep going, but we were all amazed how long it did go.
Like I said, it's brilliant. And, I mean, if a show's going to last 15 years, I'm glad Supernatural wanted to do it because, like I said, it was such a smart show that it might be the most adaptable show I've ever seen, where it could constantly keep moving and morphing into something new every year if it wanted, when it wanted to.
That's because nobody can ever die.
Right.
I
and,
mean,
and,
yeah.
and I will say, as we're gonna touch now on Americana, which I think is a brilliant piece of music. I think not just for the show, but just on its own. Like Americana, I feel like is a piece that completely devoid of supernatural at all. It's absolutely can stand on its own as just a brilliant piece of music.
Thank you. I
No problem.
appreciate it.
I 100% mean it. It's on my iTunes. I downloaded it. And I think not only do I love the piece, but even the title Americana feels like it totally defines what Supernatural was those first 5 years, which it was Americana. It had the classic music. It had those, like I said, the roadmap of America. The boys felt classic Americana and how they were all about family. So can you kind of break down your approach to creating Americana? And when you think of Americana, is it the idea? Is it just the family aspect of it? Like, which part of did you view the most as being the Americana?
Yes. Honestly, you touched on just about everything that I went through to come up with it, and of course, the actual coming up with it, I can never say. I don't know why those notes or why those chords or why that vibe showed up, other than my reaction to. I'm looking this way because that's where my screen is. But other than that, and I will say, I don't remember what the temp score was, but I remember going, it feels like Americana. And I remember thinking in my head, well, there's the title of this, but I didn't know at that point that I had written the family theme. It only became apparent to me the next season and the season after that, and these moments that signified, more often than not, either a deep love moment or a deep soul-crushing sad moment, but had to do with the brothers and their family and their origins. And one time I don't remember, but one time, it's been so long. Who was the brother? Their long.
Oh, Adam.
Yeah, but then I just remember using the theme once, and I got some fan resentment. They said, "Hey, that's not a fan. He's not in the family." And I tried to say, but in this context, it felt familial, and that's why I did it, because I really did try to honor that theme wouldn't just be used when it willy-nilly, that it had to have some meaning for that. But I remember, some fans really were very, they didn't want their world messed with, and I didn't have that intent, but I was always very careful. But my point is that when I wrote that, and I was very happy with it, I must say that I didn't realize that it was something material that I was going to go back to and revisit and plug in and plug in. And to my good fortune, it really did become a fan favorite. And I understand that it was played at the conventions, the supernatural conventions, and so that makes me it's nothing better for
And
composer to hear than something like that.
and what I love about it, I feel like the song itself is similar to Supernatural, the show, where there's definitely different tones within the song.
Yes,
There's that warmth to it. There's also a sadness, like an undercurrent of
exactly.
sadness to it as well. Sometimes a wistfulness a little bit within it as well. I mean, that's amazing range to put into that one song.
Well, if you think about the construction of the piece, the way that it appears on the soundtrack album, it's kind of two pieces that like an A section and a B section.
Mm.
When it goes to the solo piano part, that's the meat of the family theme. The other stuff I only used a few times. The real meat of the family theme was da da dee da da da, right? So that, and the other stuff, I don't know, I used it just a few more times. But the brothers theme, that little middle piano part, I reinterpolated that many times, many different ways. I remember using, if you look at the very last scene of the last episode of the series, the postscript, when when Bob and the boys and everybody's the whole cast and crew is standing on the bridge and the camera's pulling back. Do you remember that
Yeah.
closing moment? I used it there. I used the other part of the theme there because it just made sense. It just made sense. So,
Well,
like I said, you can't just force feed music into something. It has to have a reason to be there.
now I'm sure your memory on this is better than mine. Because I can't quite call. Cause actually, I'm kind of interested that you mentioned how you use it for the moments of family, and the two brothers, and you did it for that third brother, Adam. Now, there's honestly maybe it's a question, maybe it's not a question, but Bobby Singer is viewed as a father figure, part of the family. Was he ever incorporated into the Americana theme when it was time when he was with the boys?
I never did it. I don't recall ever doing it unless they were present and it touched on something. I never recall using it for just him. Oh, I remember using it once with Castile. I remember using it once with him. I think when he died, because he had become like a brother to
Yeah.
them. So that was my own little reasoning. And that one might have been the one that I took a little bit of shit for. But, it's all good.
Now, there's another there's an instrument that's being used in Americana. I'm kind of curious about. Is that an oboe I'm hearing as the wind piece that's in the
Yeah,
American?
oboe and English horn, which
Oh,
are
okay.
they're both related. They're both double reed instruments. English horn is a slightly lower timbrely and range wise, but yeah, they're both there. And also clarinet is playing one of the
Because,
melodies.
like I said, the pieces it's just it's such it's a very beautiful piece, and I think you hit on something that was absolute genius with Americana, and I think that's it's wonderful, and I that moment sticks in my head forever when in season five, like when they're remembering themselves playing with the army character, and you hear the Americana. It's so well done.
Thank you. And I, like you just said, that the visual and the storytelling was potent. So it brought it out of me. It wasn't just in a vacuum, honestly. But listen, if I can have one piece that lasts over the course of a show that goes for 15 years, I'm pleased. I'm very happy about it.
Now, another great piece of yours, which is a totally different type of piece, was played in the season four monster movie, where you played the old monster movie, which is like that classic old school Hammer horror kind of feel to it. Can you
My
kind of break that
my
down?
my favorite score of the whole series because of how different it is. We never even came close to that. And anywhere else, we never needed to, because this was the way Bob shot it. That sort of Hitchcockian, it's pre-Hitchcock. It was, Frankenstein
Yeah.
level, black and white. So, just to be able to quote the harmonic language and the spirit of those horror movies from the 30s and 40s, and 50s. That was, I didn't sleep that way. Be honest. I mean, I maybe got an hour or two a night. That's how hard I worked on that, because it was such a different ballpark. But I don't recall. Maybe the musical, maybe fan fiction was a blast also.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed everything, but you know what I'm saying. That one just caught me off guard, as like, oh, this is a whole other world, universe we're in. And it's tongue in cheek, but
Yeah.
the music can't be tongue in cheek. The music has to speak to that great old style of writing. And I will never forget that we watched a playback, and it was, when the show was mixed, and Eric was there, and, he turned to me. I have to paraphrase him because I don't want to, it sounds very immodest, but he just turned to me and said, "That's one of the best TV scores I've ever heard." Something like that. And that was my boss telling me that, essentially. So it was great. And I still love it. And you know what? If you asked me to write that tomorrow, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could do it.
I mean, I mean, obviously that episode is so classic. And as you mentioned, it goes to that old Hammer horror, Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula. Was there a particular score from those films that you kind of thought, I'm going to use that to inspire what I'm going to do now? Or was it just, generally speaking, just the overall just feel of what those movies were?
Yeah, yes, it was, because there was no, I mean, we're talking about Franz Waxman, and I mean, there's a list of the composers from that era that did that stuff so incredibly. But I didn't. I just had an amalgamation of the sound of it, and I have in me a little bit of that harmonic language that you can't use anymore, really, in modern scoring and in modern thinking. But it's just delicious to do when you get an opportunity. And that's one of the few I've ever had in my life, to just go full bore on it. And, it's campy and awesome. When it was originally written, it was brilliant and incredible. And then,
Yeah.
like so many things, 40, 50, 60 years later, it becomes campy. And so that was always in the back of my mind, that even though I'm writing it stylistically like those things, I'm there. I'm allowed to be over the top. I'm allowed to be melodramatic and over the top, as opposed to having good taste.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a brilliant piece, and not only that though, but you also have the challenge, as you mentioned before, is that within the tongue-in-cheek nature and the humor of the episode, it's still a supernatural episode. You still have a monster that needs to be killed. You still have the brothers having to do their thing.
Of course.
That's be a tough needle to thread, because, like, as you mentioned, you can't make it silly in the music, and because then at some point it could get too over the top, and you still need to keep it supernatural and the feel supernatural. Like I said, how did you walk that line so carefully?
I hardly at all thought supernatural.
Yeah,
I went fully to the black and white images that I saw. I went to that world, and then just, scene specific. Is this the right music for this scene? But in that world. So I didn't consider that we were, in other words, I never put some kind of governor on myself saying, "Oh, this is supernatural. I have to reel it back in." No, I went to the world that the visuals represented.
the fan base is rabid. It's still active. They're still begging for season 16. I can't have to think that they're leaving money on the table at this
So
point.
here's my question, and I loved working on the show, and of course, I did the Winchesters too,
Yeah.
which I mean, I love Robbie Thompson, and we just couldn't, it didn't quite connect with the supernatural crowd until Dean showed up. Um, but there was good episodes, I think, but it just didn't quite do
And
it. But how do you do a season 16 when both boys are dead?
see, my thought on that would have to be that you would have to play with time. It would be my imagination, and you would somehow have to. The trigger would have to be Dean coming back to life for some purpose. Would have to be the trigger. The problem would be obviously Sam would have to be de-aged, so you have to come out. So the continuity would be messed up at that point. But I think the fans would allow a play of continuity to get the show back. That's how you would have to do it.
I don't disagree because they've allowed everything else.
Right. And
Um,
but one thing I was thinking too, because looking at your pieces, I also felt like Wayward Sisters was something that I thought was going to happen.
so did I. Yeah, I don't know the answer. It's a head scratcher. I think when you look in hindsight, you go, oh, I see why Supernatural was successful. This fantastic chemistry between Sam and Dean and the quality of those actors and the fact that they were, handsome, strong, were able to go to an emotional place, all of that combined and great sort of storytelling. And so in hindsight, you go, oh, I can see why that worked, but I can say the same thing for, I don't know why this one didn't work.
Hmm.
I don't know why Wayward Sisters didn't work. I thought it had promise, and I loved that it would have been, sort of women centric, and that would have been cool to do.
I
And
I I would have loved it. I thought Wayward Sister was the next best step. I mean, Winchesters. I think what some people, like such as myself, might have had an issue with Winchesters was that it was a blatant change in continuity
yeah,
because the father couldn't have possibly have been in those situations and still been unknown to that world when Supernatural happened. So I mean, I guess what they did, what they created was eventually was alternate reality, which was an interesting step, side step to that problem. But I
yeah.
think there was concern early on that they were messing too much with continuity, I think, before they knew it was a sidestep. But Wayward Sisters, I thought, was the natural progression of that show. I thought that just made, I mean, you had all the characters you love, and all you had to do was just make it them. And then the brothers come in once in a while. Then you had a perfect show.
Do you remember what season that was, Jeff? I don't
Wayward
even,
Sisters, God, I can't remember. It had to be,
like 11 or
yeah,
12, somewhere
it was deep
there?
into the show when they finally got around to the Wayward Sisters. But I mean, it had so much, but I thought it had great. When I saw that, I was like, I know they also had the one in Chicago that was like one episode off, and it never happened. But
That
Wayward
one,
Sisters,
that one didn't work for me.
yeah, I could, but I felt Wayward Sisters just felt the natural progression. It just felt like it. That's how you spin it off.
Yeah. Well, you know, we tried.
When you were doing the theme for Wayward Sisters, did you automatically know, or were you thinking I'm making this theme as if it's going to be its own show later, or was it still
Yeah, yeah. I
incremental?
tried to. I mean, I tried to still be cut from the cloth of Supernatural, but have room for possibility because it wasn't going to be like reinventing the wheel or anything. It was still going to be, the good versus evil, and that sort of bird's eye view of it was going to stay the same.
Hmm.
But I just go back to the same thing. What I see on the screen is what I respond to. And that's why I prefer to see it rather than read it. If I read a script, I'm gonna make my own movie and own tempo and own setting and all that. And so I prefer to see the filmmaker's vision realized, and that helps me musically, and that's what happened on all those attempted spin-offs. It was the same thing. You're still in the zone,
Yeah.
still in the supernatural zone, and also because it was me, or it would have been me and Chris, or me and Philip White, or whatever it would have been. It was still going to have the same sort of bone marrow.
Hmm. And like I said, and as someone who's just been a fan of Superman, and like I said, great memories every it was Tuesday and Thursday sitting with my father. Even when I moved away, like to a different house, I would come by just to watch the show he would record for me. We'd sit and we'd watch it together.
Really
Um,
cool.
thank
That's
you so much.
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much for making the music for such a great show. And I just want to thank you so much for doing that. And your music will live forever. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff, and great questions.
Thank you.
Honestly, questions that came from a place that I can appreciate, which is sincere interest and clearly. I mean, I'm touched by the fact that you have your own family theme because you watched it with your dad for so long. That's just a beautiful thing.
Thank you so
Beautiful
much.
thing.
Thank
All
you.
right, Jeff.
Have a great night. And like I said, thank you again for coming to the show.
Pleasure, buddy. All right.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Verdant Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Turn for the next episode when Brian H. Kim boards the mothership to discuss the score to Gentry Chow versus the Underworld on Netflix. Until next voyage, travel on.